Hello there, everybody. It's Cheddar Toksugi, and today I'm gonna be reading a Komahina fanfic, aka Nagito Komaida x Hajime. Today's fanfic is called You Still See Them in Your Dreams by Three of Diamonds. This has mentions of PTSD. There is a small amount of fluff. It is a hurt/comfort story. Hajime pulled. Oh, wait, shoot, sorry. Summary. Hajime pulled back and shook his head. I'm fine now. I just wanted to check if anyone's dead. No one's dead, Nagito interrupted. Everyone's alive, Hajime. They're sleeping, except for you and me. We're all okay. You just had a nightmare. I know that. Hajime frowned at him, but it quickly turned into worry again. Still, it'd be good to check, right? Or, basically, Hajime has a nightmare and wakes up thinking his friends are dead. Nagito's just there for the comfort part. Warning, there is blood and vomiting. Or I guess speaks of it, because, yeah. Title from Talk to Me by Cavetown. That's just a little interesting fact that they have. Anyways, a few months had passed since everybody started living on Jabberwock Island. Everything was going good, everyone was starting to heal, and friendships are starting to form again. As impossible as it seemed, even the victims on the Neo World program were starting to trust their killers again. It was a nice day, and they were all spending it on the beach. Hajime was sitting on the sand watching the others with a smile. There was just one person missing now. As if on cue, Nagito appeared out of nowhere and plopped down next to Hajime. Hajime smiled wider. Hey, Nagito. He turned to look at him. Nagito wasn't there. The beach was silent now. The laughter and chatter of his friends had vanished. Hajime quickly jumped to his feet, realizing he was in a warehouse. Nagito? Hajime called out, his eyes darting around and scanning the area. Guys, That's when he spotted someone lying on the floor. Hajime rushed over. He got closer and he recognized the person. Nagito Komaida was on the floor, but this was different from when they had found him in the program. This was far worse. There was no tape over his mouth, and Hajime could see the agony on his face. Even though it was smeared with blood, he had been stabbed so many times that Hajime couldn't even count the wounds. Cuts marred his face, throat, chest, arms, and legs, everywhere. A choked sound escaped Hajime's throat. Nagito? The smell of blood made him gag. He stepped back, looking around. Blood was really everywhere. The floor and walls were drenched in it. There was no way one person could bleed this much. And that's when he noticed it. There were more bodies scattered all over the warehouse. Hajime felt like he was paralyzed. He couldn't bring himself to go to any of them, but he could recognize them even from where he was standing. They were dead. All his friends were dead. He could see Soda, Ibuki, Fuyuhiko. He took another step back and bumped into somebody. He turned only to see himself. No, not himself. His hair was darker and longer. He was looking at Hajime with a blank expression and red eyes. Did you do this? Hajime asked, his voice trembling. No. Izu- Izuru replied, his voice as flat as ever. You did. Izuru glanced down at Hajime's hands, and Hajime followed his gaze. Blood. It was blood. His hands were covered in blood. Suddenly something grabbed Hajime's ankle, and Izuru disappeared. Hajime yelped, looking down to see Nagito's bloody hand reaching for him. Filled with terror, Nagito wasn't dead yet, but he was losing his strength quickly. Hajime, Nagito managed to say, his voice weak, before breaking into a fit of shaky laughter. Hajime noticed tears streaming down Nagito's face, and he realized he was crying too. He wanted to help Nagito, to say something before it was too late, but he felt paralyzed, unable to move or speak. Please, it hurts. Help, Hajime. I don't want to die. The voice didn't sound like Nagito. Nagito's hand went limp, and suddenly Chiaki was in front of him instead. Chiaki, in her final moments, her face was covered in blood, tears streaming down her barely opened eyes. Hajime wanted to do something, anything, but he couldn't move until Chiaki's body went still in a pool of her own blood. Only then did he reach down to pick up her hairpin up from the ground. Hajime stared at it and broke down in tears. He sat there sobbing uncontrollably until he felt like he couldn't breathe anymore. He didn't want to breathe anymore. Hajime Hinata woke up screaming. He sat up in bed, breathing heavily. His cheeks were wet with tears, and his throat hurt from screaming. He tried to wipe his face, but the tears kept coming. Looking down at his hands, he saw they were normal. They looked normal. There was no blood on them. It was just a nightmare, Hajime told himself. Taking a shaky breath, he glanced at his window. It was still dark outside. Luckily, it seemed he hadn't disturbed anyone, but that nightmare. He groaned and rubbed his eyes. It was a new one. It was worse. The worst he ever had. The images were still vivid in his mind. Several long minutes of trying to calm down and breathe normally, he realized it wasn't working. The feeling of nausea was only getting worse. Hajime barely made it to the bathroom before he felt like he was going to be sick. He cried the entire time he threw up, until there was nothing left in his stomach. He groaned, forcing himself to stand up. He washed his face and held onto the sink, breathing heavily. He glanced up at his reflection in the mirror. He looked terrible. His eyes and face were red, his hair was sweaty and sticking to his forehead. He felt miserable. Now he needed to go back to bed and try to sleep again, or maybe read a book to distract himself. But he didn't want to do either. Sleeping now felt like a terrible idea, especially with his thoughts racing. Plus, he could sense that Izuru wanted to talk to him. He did not want that right now, especially after what he'd just seen. Fresh air. That's what he needed. Hajime stepped out of his cottage, not bothering to grab a jacket. Outside was dark and quiet, but it didn't feel peaceful. He felt anxious. They're sleeping. Everyone's just sleeping, he told himself. But then Nagito's corpse from his dream flashed in his mind. All that blood. It was as if he could smell it again. If he looked, maybe all the cottages would be completely covered in blood. Maybe everybody was already dead, but he didn't know. Before he knew it, he was running to Nagito's cottage. Nagito Kamaido was used to waking up in the middle of the night. He had grown accustomed to waking up screaming. The memories of flames, pain, and the smell of smoke and blood still in his mind. He would often shake, drenched in cold sweat, as his brain struggled to understand where he was. However, he wasn't used to waking up from a rare peaceful sleep to the sound of someone banging on his door. Nagito jumped up, the loud noise making him flinch. He quickly got out of bed and opened the door. Before he could think about who it might be at this hour, the person behind the door stepped back. As soon as Nagito opened it, he saw his boyfriend, Hajime, standing there in his pajamas, his messy hair showing that he had just woken up too. But Hajime's mismatched eyes were wide with obvious panic. "Hajime?" Nagito mumbled, still groggy. "What are you doing here? It's late." Hajime didn't respond right away, and Nagito wondered if he had even heard me. You're alive. It wasn't really you," Hajime finally said, breathing heavily. "Huh? Of course I am, Hajime." Nagito frowned, now more awake and a bit worried. "What do you mean it wasn't really me? Are you okay?" "Yeah, okay. Yeah, sorry." Hajime looked at Nagito, still panicked. Before Nagito could say anything, Hajime continued. "It was a nightmare. Sorry." "Oh, so that was what was going on." This kind of thing wasn't uncommon for on the island. Flashbacks, panic attacks, and nightmares. He guessed that was what Hajime was experiencing. After everything they had been through, before, during the Nero World program, it was normal for everyone to have them, but Hajime had never had one before. Usually Hajime was the one helping others. He was really good at it. Everyone went for him for support. And he helped them whenever he could. He had helped Nagito many times, and definitely more than he deserved. Nagito shook his head to pull himself out of his thoughts, and focused on the boy trembling in front of him. When Hajime started shaking, Hajime was mumbling to himself now, not looking at Nagito. "Hajime?" Nagito asked, tilting his head. Do you want to... Why don't you come in?" "No!" Hajime pulled back and shook his head. I'm fine now. I just wanted to check if anyone's dead." "No one's dead," Nagito interrupted. Everyone's alive, Hajime. They're sleeping, except for you and me. They're all okay. You just had a nightmare." I know that." Hajime frowned at him, but quickly turned into worry again. "Still, it'd be good to check, right? He suddenly grabbed Nagito's hand, trying to pull him out of the cottage. "Hajime, stop!" Nagito stumbled forward, but managed to stay in place, pulling his hand out of Hajime's grasp. "Everything's alright. Try taking a deep breath." "Ugh, why aren't you listening to me?" Hajime, somehow frustrated even in his panic, tried to pull away without success. There was so much blood everywhere. Seriously, it was too much. It was everywhere. You have to come with me, please. I have to know if everyone's safe." Nagito shook his head in desperation. It seemed impossible to reason with Hajime right now. This was bad. "You said it yourself, didn't you? It was a nightmare." Nagito tried again, this time with a softer tone. "But all right, Could you please come in and tell me what you saw first? Then I can... And then I'll even go with you, okay? Nagito looked at Hajime nervously after saying that. He knew that if they woke up anyone just to check if they were alive, they definitely wouldn't be happy about it. But he didn't care if it was for Hajime. Hopefully, he would calm down before they had to. Hajime seemed to accept it as he stopped struggling and nodded, letting Nagito pull him inside this time. Nagito let out a small sigh of relief, guiding Hajime into the cottage and gently pushing him to sit on his bed. Hajime still didn't pull away or protest, staring blankly ahead. Nagito couldn't decide which was more worrying. Nagito stood in front of Hajime and looked at him. It was strange to see Hajime like this. Nagito was confident that Hajime was the strongest of all of them, mentally, and he was sure he wasn't the only one who thought that. While the rest of the Ultimates struggled to cope with everything that had happened, Hajime seemed unaffected with how he worked hard every day and helped everyone. Now that the same Hajime was sitting on Nagito's bed, showing that he was just as damaged as everyone else. Nagito had worried about Hajime overworking himself before, since it was normal for Hajime to skip meals and sleep, just because he was too busy. But he never thought this was something he had to worry about, too. And now he felt guilty for it. Out of all people, he should have realized Hajime had been struggling, too. Hey, can you look at me? Nagito knelt down in front of Hajime. Then, when Hajime didn't say anything, Nagito took his hand gently. Hajime, can you hear me? Hajime blinked and replied, Yeah? Alright, Nagito said softly. Do you want to talk about it now? Hajime stared at Nagito's face for a moment, before looking away. I saw you were dead. Nagito flinched. Oh, you mean the time No. Hajime shook his head, wrapping his arms around himself. It wasn't a memory. Not really. It was you. We're different. I saw you and then everyone else. Then I saw... Hajime couldn't finish his sentence, a small sob escaping him. Nagito reacted quickly, pulling Hajime into a hug. Okay. Come here. You're alright. Hajime took a deep shaky breath, burying his face in Nagito's shoulder and crying, trying to focus on the feeling of Nagito's hold on him and his hands and his hair. The little calming things he had right now, instead of the painful memories that kept flooding back. I'm fine. Oh, I'm fine, see? He heard Nagito say, keeping his voice soft. I'm here, and everybody else is fine too. If you still want to, we can even go check. You know I don't mind. Hajime shook his head. No, no. He mumbled and held on to Nagito more. He didn't know how long they sat there, like that, in complete silence, with Nagito holding him, before he suddenly talked again. I saw Chiaki. That part was a memory. Oh, Nagito said quietly, looking at Hajime, who was crying again. He felt pathetic now. Hajime rarely cried, and now he couldn't even count how many times He had broken down tonight. His head hurt from how much he cried. I'm sorry. Nagito hugged him tighter, but it felt a little awkward, as if he wasn't sure what to do anymore. He paused, trying to find the right words. It was just a nightmare. Everything's okay now. That was a long time ago, and that wasn't your fault. Hajime didn't reply, but it was. Everything was his fault. Izuru Kamukura's existence, and all the things he had done, Chiaki's death, and the end of the world, the killing game in the simulation. How could somebody say that knowing all the things Hajime had done? Maybe Nagito realized he had said the wrong thing because he quickly spoke up again. Do you want some water? Hajime nodded. Nagito nodded back, slowly letting go of Hajime and getting up. He thought he was starting to calm down. He was wrong. As soon as Nagito started to walk away, he stood up too. Wait, don't. And just as Nagito turned to look at him, he collapsed on the floor again, suddenly sobbing and hyperventilating without any warning. Hey, what happened? Nagito had thought Hajime was calming down, but instead he spiraled into a panic even worse than before. Nagito struggled to keep himself from panicking too. It looked like whatever was going on with him a few minutes ago wasn't Hajime's breakdown. This was... Nagito quietly walked to Hajime and sat on the floor next to him. He was crying. Nagito realized he never had seen him cry, and letting out small shaky gasps between his sobs. Hajime? Nagito reached out and touched his shoulder. Hajime didn't react to either of the actions. Can you hear me? I'm here. Just try to breathe. You're safe. You're with me. Nagito said, but Hajime didn't respond. He just kept sobbing, gasping, and shaking while Nagito sat beside him, whispering small, comforting words. Feeling completely helpless. He didn't know what to do. Everything he said felt pointless. How could a few words make a difference? What else could he do? For once, Hajime really needed his help, and Nagito felt utterly useless. He hated that feeling. Think. He had to think. What does Hajime always do? But that didn't help at all. Nagito usually talked a lot when he was upset, going on and on about until he ended up feeling worse about himself. That's how Hajime used to talk to him, reminding him that his thoughts weren't true. But Hajime wasn't saying anything. How could Nagito stop him from crying when nothing he said seemed to reach him? Okay. Oh no, I lost where I was at. I lost my track. Okay. Still, even though he tried every little thing that came to his mind, none of them managed to get to Hajime. Nagito didn't have a clock in his cottage, and neither of the boys wore a watch. So he couldn't probably know how much time had passed since Hajime started crying. When it finally died down, and Nagito felt him go limp against him, still breathing heavily. Nagito sat there on the floor with his boyfriend resting against him. Nagito tried his best to be soothing. He had been useless in actually helping him, but the least he could do was but at least he could try to provide comfort now. He couldn't see Hajime's face with how they were sitting, but he could tell from his breathing that he was still wide awake, although undoubtedly exhausted. Hajime? The only response he got was a quiet mumble he couldn't understand. Can you stand up? You shouldn't stay on the floor like this. He felt Hajime nod, but he didn't make any effort to get up. Nagito sighed, standing up and carefully pulling Hajime with him. Hajime leaned against him again, and Nagito didn't mind at all. He was just glad to be of help. Slowly, he guided Hajime back to the bed, supporting him with one hand on his back and wrapping his other arm around Hajime's shoulders. But Hajime pulled away and laid down before Nagito could do anything else. Nagito watched as Hajime curled up and closed his eyes, his breathing changing in just a few moments. He had already fallen asleep. Okay. Nagito murmured to himself, looking at the boy peacefully sleeping on his bed. The worry from earlier had vanished, and Hajime's face looked completely calm. Nagito carefully tucked a blanket around him before lying down himself, facing Hajime. He rested his head on his arm and watched Hajime's sleeping face until he eventually drifted off to sleep too. Hajime noticed two things when he woke up. He wasn't in his own bed, and he wasn't alone. He was pretty sure both things weren't true when he went to sleep last night. Sorry, I need to check something. He shifted a bit and looked around to understand where he was. It didn't take long to realize he was with Nagito, his cheek resting against Nagito's shoulder, and Nagito had his arms wrapped loosely around him while he slept. He remembered everything that happened last night. To some point, he remembered Nagito getting up, but after that, the clearest thing he could recall was feeling incredibly scared. Something he knew by now that meant he had a panic attack. Hajime sighed to himself. He hadn't meant to break down like that. It wasn't like he never had nightmares before. He had them almost every night. But he always managed to calm himself down and go back to sleep without needing anyone's help. It didn't take too long for his sense of reality to come back to him and make him realize the things he saw were for months ago. They weren't real. Well, most of the time. Now he made Nagito worry, but he was just glad that at least no one else had seen him like that. He felt more comfortable trusting Nagito with it than others. But still, his first instinct was pulled away considering that he definitely embarrassed himself last night. Despite that, he stayed where he was. Running away from his problems was exactly what he was trying to help Nagito stop doing. He couldn't do it himself now. That would make him a bad example, wouldn't it? If he ignored his annoying thoughts, he was warm and comfortable. So he didn't really want to leave anyways. But those annoying thoughts were still there. And he didn't want to be alone with him in a quiet room. The atmosphere could have been nice and cozy, but he didn't like it now. Nagito? Hajime nudged the white-haired boy. Hey, Nagito, wake up. Just when Hajime thought about letting Nagito sleep for a bit longer, Nagito opened his eyes and smiled sleepily at him. Hey. Nagito lifted his hands to brush Hajime's hair away from his forehead, then letting his hand rest on Hajime's cheek. How are you feeling? I'm fine. Hajime sat up quickly, making Nagito's hand drop as he sat up more slowly. Are you sure? You seemed kind of scared last night. Yeah, but I'm fine now. Hajime quickly raised his hands to cut him off before he could go on about it. Thanks to you, I guess? His question made Nagito laugh a little, and the kind of laugh was usually worried everyone. Of course not, I didn't do anything. Nagito shook his head quickly and looked at him. Huh? Hajime frowned, confused, especially since Nagito's usual demeanor was back now that he was more awake. He laughed again. No, Hajime, I was basically useless. You just cried until you fell asleep. Why are you saying it with that tone? I'm just telling you the truth. Nagito stopped laughing and sighed. I really couldn't do anything, because I didn't know what to do. Well, I mean, I'm alright now, so... Hajime tried to reason with him, but Nagito shook his head again and sighed. No. Good now. Can't you see? I should have figured out what to do then, but I didn't. You can definitely see how useless. Oh God, just shut up. Hajime's words made Nagito's eyes widen in shock, but Hajime felt more embarrassed than angry. I mean, I was panicking or whatever, but before that I came here, right? Well, because I needed to see you. Isn't that enough for you? No, it's not. Nagito replied immediately. You coming here would only matter if I did something about it. And you had a peaceful night after that. But I didn't know. I wouldn't know what to do about that either. Don't worry. And I wasn't gonna have a good night either way. Hajime frowned to himself. I'm not gonna say, oh, I never have nightmares just because no one would believe that, especially not you. But seriously, something like that never happens. I just wake up and sort it out. Really? Nagito tilted his head a little. What made it different then? What are your nightmares usually about? Oh, if it's okay for me to ask. No, I don't want to talk about that now, okay? Just forget it. Seriously, it's not like it's going to happen again. I'm sorry, Hajime. But if it happened once, it could happen again. Nagito responded with a sad smile, and Hajime could tell from both his tone and from everything he knew about Nagito that he was an experience. Hajime knew he was right. Everyone had their first time with things, and like this after they started living on the island, not just nightmares. He had seen some of them and heard about the rest. Everyone said it's fine, that it was nothing to worry about. and it wouldn't happen again. But they always shared knowing looks. It was something to worry about, and it happened again to all of them more than once. Hajime knew that they all said it either because they actually believed it or as a desperate attempt to not burden their friends when everyone had their own problems. Maybe a part of them thought they deserved it, or after everything they had done. He knew for a fact that Nagito and Mikon had those thoughts the most, but he doubted they were the only ones. What Hajime didn't know was why he just said the same words he had heard from his classmates so many times before to Nagito now. Come on, Hajime. We can think of something, right? I just want to know how I can help you, like you do for me and everyone, Nagito said, leaning forward. But you have to talk to me about it. No, you don't need to, Hajime pulled back. Someone constantly worrying about him was the last thing he wanted. After all, he could handle everything himself, especially with all the ultimate talents Izuru had. Except last night, true, but something like that was not going to happen again. Ugh. He was really lying to himself that desperately. He didn't need anyone else to tell him that. It was. But if something inside of him refused to accept it, maybe it was just that he didn't want to feel weak. Why? Nagito's shoulders drooped, his voice a mix of disappointment and worry. Do you not trust me enough for things like that? I mean, it's only fair if you don't, after all. No. Hajime interrupted, raising his hands. Stop that, alright? There's nothing wrong with you. I completely trust you, Nagito. It's just, I don't want you to have to worry about me. Helping others, that's my job. I don't need others helping me. Shouldn't I be different from the others? Nagito teased, but continued in a more serious tone before Hajime could respond. But you do, Hajime, and you should. You hardly take a break with everything you do. And if the rest you get, like last night, that's not good. Why don't you let me help you? I can listen to you, anything. You know I'll do anything to support you. Yeah, knowing you literally do anything. That's a bit concerning, Hajime said with a smile. It's not about me, Nagito slumped against him, careful not to push him over. But fine. Would you ask me for help when you need it if I promise I won't do anything? That's hard to believe coming from you. Do you really promise that? Hajime teased. Nagito gave him a crooked smile, but didn't respond. The silence made Hajime think about last night again, but this time he remembered how he had woke Nagito up. Hajime never slept a lot. He usually stayed awake to do different things, but he often found himself wide awake staring at the ceiling when he had nothing else to do. Part of it was to avoid his nightmares, and part of it was to be fully awake if someone came to him in the middle of the night, which happened a lot. After all, everyone had sort of accepted Hajime, or maybe Izuru, as the island's therapist. Hajime didn't mind it, but recently he had noticed fewer people came to him frantically after a nightmare. This could mean two things. Both made him happy. Either they were having fewer nightmares, which was unlikely but a nice thought, or they had found the other people they've trusted enough to go to. This was true, and Hajime saw it every day. Everyone was getting along more and more, forgiving each other and trying to trust each other again. It could take time, but he was happy about the progress. Hajime snapped out of his thoughts when Nagito waved his hand in front of his face. Hajime? Hajime sighed. I'm fine, just thinking. He then frowned, grabbing Nagito's wrist, looking at his prosthetic arm. Did you go to bed with that? Nagito pulled away, looking at his side. Oh, of course not. Hajime gave him an unimpressed look. You're not even trying to lie. Still, he wasn't in the mood to scold him, so he let it go. Now that they had sat there in silence for some minutes, he felt like it could be calm and nice again. Just like he wanted. Would be nice to spend some more time. What the hell is that? Oh. Sorry. I got distracted by something. Just like he wanted. It could be nice to spend some more time with Nagito now, so he shifted to pull Nagito close for an embrace. He hummed and buried his face into Nagito's white fluffy hair. Nagito hugged back and got more comfortable and stayed quiet for like that after that. Hey, there's no way you could have said some kind of magic word to fix everything last night. You realize that, right? Hajime looked down at Nagito, who was already looking up at him, and smiled when Nagito gave him a small, uncertain nod. But you always know what to say, Hajime. I've seen it a lot. You're really amazing. Nagito's words made Hajime laugh. He huffed and looked away. Yeah, right. If it wasn't for Zuru's constant comments in my head, I'd fail at some of the most basic social interactions, let alone that. Nagito tilted his head, and Hajime half expected him to go on another example, but to his surprise, Nagito just closed his eyes, resting his head on Hajime's chest, and mumbled, That's alright. You really are amazing anyways. Hearing that from Nagito definitely meant something. Actually, it meant a lot. Nagito actually managed to say or do something that caught him off guard. Well, that was part of why Hajime liked him so much. Do you want to get up now? Others are probably having breakfast. Hajime asked slightly, already knowing Nagito's answer, as he stroked his hair. Nagito just shook his head and tightened his hold on Hajime. Alright. Hajime hummed with a smile. Then we can stay a little longer. Thank you for reading, and... Oh, I'm stupid. Sorry, I read the notes. But this was the end of You Still See Them in Your Dreams by Three of Diamonds. I hope you enjoyed this fanfiction as much as I did. This was requested by Pringles Time, and thank you so much for the request. Also, have a wonderful day, drink water, and make sure to stay happy. Bye!